North Korea staged a rare mixed firing exercise on Tuesday, firing close-range ballistic missiles and artillery rockets toward the West Sea. We delve deeper into the regime's latest military provocation tonight with Dr. Mark Berry joining us virtually. Good evening, Dr. Berry. Good morning to you.
Yes, thank you. Very happy to be back.
Thanks for joining us. And also joining us here in the studio is Dr. Myung-hyun. Good evening, Dr. Go.
Good to be here.
So, Dr. Go, North Korea claims the missiles feature precision autonomous navigation and AI-powered terminal guidance technology. What do you believe North Korea is trying to signal through the latest provocation?
Well, clearly North Korea is signaling that they are still developing and perfecting their missile capability. And what's interesting is that the weapon system they tested, it's a close-range ballistic missile. And the fact of the matter is that they disclosed that they are incorporated new, more intelligent navigation system.
Right.
What it means is that North Korea is essentially perfecting and also upgrading their capability, especially to evade missile defense systems. I think North Koreans, just like us, have been watching what's going on in the Middle East.
Of course.
And they're seeing that the modern conflict is driven by missiles. And they've seen how the missiles are being essentially targeted by the missile defense system. So, and they know that the South Korea and the United States are at the very cutting edge of missile defense systems. For instance, South Korea, just like the United States, have been supporting our partners in the Middle East, especially the United Arab Emirates, with the missile defense systems. And North Korea is essentially saying that, look, we know that South Korea, you guys have a very good missile defense systems, but now we're also deploying new weapon systems that have more intelligence, AI-based guidance systems. That what it means is that they are very robust to electronic warfare and trying to essentially deceive missiles, that they are surveillance rather than going to a certain direction, and also as terminal guidance systems that are more robust to GPS jamming. So, and that's the message. North Korea is saying that, especially this is a message directed at South Korea, that no matter what kind of defense we put up, North Korea has a capability to defeat it.
Well, this is just out of my curiosity. This time the missiles were a close-range ballistic missile. It doesn't have to do with the distance then?
So it's more about, so sometimes North Korea launches long-range ballistic missiles, oftentimes towards the Sea of Japan or like Japan. And this is a message directed at United States and Japan, that they have the long-range strike capability. So no country is safe from North Korea's reach. But then this time, North Korea is testing short-range ballistic missiles. So they are essentially limiting the scope of their threats. So they are sending a message directed at South Korea, not to Japan, not to the United States. So this is a message to South Korea. I think they are taking into consideration that South Korea has been focusing a lot in the indigenous weapons development.
Right.
I think yesterday President Lee was in this roundtable discussing about South Korea's plan to build nuclear-powered submarines. And I think North Koreans are also responding to that.
I see. Well, in the meantime, Dr. Berry, there is a growing speculation that Chinese President Xi Jinping may visit North Korea, but it seems like he's not going there anytime this week, right?
Well, they had the coal mine disaster. Something like 90 people died in a coal mine collapse. Also, I believe the president of Serbia is visiting China between the 24th and today, so they may have met. But already we see signs, particularly, you can't fake sending advanced Chinese security personnel to Pyongyang, the kind of people that would prepare for a state visit. That's kind of unmistakable. It's kind of like sending the Secret Service and the big beast Cadillac limousine, when the president of the U.S. travels. So I think that the purpose is, number one, it's reciprocity for Kim Jong-un's visit at the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II in Beijing last September. Where he and Putin were in the front row. So it's reciprocal for that visit. And also it completes a cycle of the delayed visit between Trump and Xi in Beijing, the already scheduled visit with Putin in Beijing, which I think was like his 25th in Beijing. And so it's due time. It's just a question of fungibility. And besides, when you deal with communist allies, they don't announce in advance the dates of their trips. Kim certainly doesn't announce in advance when he's going to China or to Russia, and I think this would be, for President Xi, his first trip in 7 months. He's not about to announce a lot of the particulars either, but I think it is going to happen, and I do believe that the main purpose is to curb Russia's current level of influence by Xi's presence sending a message that your relationship is only going to be temporary, but Chinese historically has considered the Korean Peninsula to be in its sphere of influence. Also, he's not happy with the change in the Constitution, where unification as a goal was jettisoned, because hundreds of thousands of Chinese died in 1950 to 53 during the Korean War for the sake of the unification of the Korean Peninsula. And also, having built the new Yalu River Bridge 10 years ago, President Xi, I think, wants to convey, hey, you know, finish building the roads and the custom houses on the other end. You know, let's get this bridge going. And, of course, Kim Jong-un is concerned about overbearing economic influence from China. But I think all of these things are purposes for Xi's upcoming visit.
Well, so according to Dr. Barry, North Korea-China summit will happen sometime soon. But let's say, Dr. Go, it does happen. What would Pyongyang want to hear the most or gain from Beijing this time?
Well, I think it's to essentially get a very official recognition from Beijing that North Korea is a bona fide regional power in this part of the world. And that's going to, I mean, even if China doesn't really follow that recognition with more additional diplomatic measures, that places North Korea top of the line when it comes to strategic positions in this part of the world. It's going to say speak volumes about the increase in the prestige as well as the strategic value of North Korea. And I think even the discussion that Xi Jinping is visiting North Korea to have a bilateral summit with Kim Jong-un is a huge ego booster for Kim Jong-un. And clearly the Chinese are not doing this for free. There are reasons for this. And I think the reason is because China is essentially gearing up for not just for a conflict that might not happen in 5 years' time, but possibly in 10 or 15 years' time. Essentially, I mean, it doesn't mean that it's going to happen for sure.
Okay.
But I think that China is, just like the United States, gearing up for a potential great power conflict. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there will be a war breaking out in the peninsula, but I think China is thinking about Taiwan. We know that the United States is working very closely with Japan and South Korea to prevent a conflict arising in the Taiwan Strait. And then what the United States is doing is having a very close coordination with Japan especially, but also with South Korea, security-wise as well as strategically. And then China obviously will have to respond by working closely with its allies in the region. We already know that Vladimir Putin, President of Russia, visited Beijing for a summit with Xi Jinping. And sequence of events shows that if China wanted to show that it was closely aligned with Russia, and the only reason they are closely aligned with Russia is to show a common front to the United States. And then if this close alignment followed by Xi Jinping's meeting, summit with Kim Jong-un, the message must be the same. It's all about making sure that China is at the center of this alignment called the CRINC, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. And this is all about deterring the United States. And I think in that sense, this is a major event and something that it's an inflection point, I would say. Something that I think we can no longer ignore, that China and North Korea are aligning. So it used to be that North Korea was a source of problems for China.
Right.
China saw North Korea as a proliferation risk, a backward, used to be an ally that wasn't focusing on economic development, unlike China. Now it's becoming more of a valuable partner, especially in terms of confronting the U.S. influence in the region, something that Seoul should take into consideration, I think.
Now I'm glad you mentioned the China-Russia summit because following the summit back on the 20th, Dr. Barry, speculation is growing that Xi Jinping's possible visit to Pyongyang could, pave the way for closer coordination among, like Dr. Go mentioned, among Pyongyang, Beijing, and Moscow. Should such a trip mark a significant turning point in strengthening trilateral alignment? Could you elaborate more on this?
I think that's the intended appearance, as exemplified, as I mentioned, about that front row last September with Putin and Xi and Kim Jong-un. By the way, they were talking about replacing body parts so that they could live to be 150 or even longer. I mean, an unbelievable conversation that Reuters picked up, and then China asked them to take the video down. That was wild. But, you know, more fundamentally, China, and I have to underscore, just China, wants to be at the center of a new Eurasian era that dispels centuries of Western influence by Europe and by the United States, and it wants to become the indispensable nation coordinating this new era by working with its so-called junior partners on its periphery, like Russia, like North Korea, like Iran and Pakistan. And by the way, they're reporting very, very in a clear-cut manner to China about its activities negotiating with the Trump administration about trying to bring about a permanent ceasefire and end to this war with Iran. And in general, you know, China is appealing to what they call the global South, not the old world and the northern states of the northern hemisphere. So, and also China interprets Trump's 2 terms and also the interregnum of Joe Biden as clear-cut signs of irreparable American decline. So, you know, kind of echoing some of the things that Dr. Go was just saying, a lot of this has vibes of the period from May through mid-August of 1945, which was the end of World War II in Europe, and then the end of World War II in the Pacific, and of course the division of Korea, which began on the night of August 10th and was concluded with the formal surrender on the 15th of August. So this is a very pivotal period. It's not going to be a time identity where things will be exactly the same. It'll be different, and we have to be careful to understand that people in other countries have different views than the United States, than Japan, than South Korea, than Britain, and they have their own interests. So we have to very delicately handle this period. At the same time, living stateside, I've never seen anything like this in all my life in terms of what's going on in society and its politics.
That is true. We are going through some critical periods, both domestically and internationally. Meanwhile, Dr. Go, Singapore's foreign minister is visiting South Korea after stops in China and North Korea. Now, given Singapore's part as an informal, messenger between North Korea and the U.S. as well as between the 2 Koreas, what diplomatic signals should we read here?
So I think it's a very optimistic signal. I think diplomacy is back in season in Northeast Asia. And it's very interesting because Singapore, just like some other advanced open economies that they have a very pivotal diplomatic roles or tries to have an important influence in the diplomatic domain, such as Sweden, Switzerland, and Qatar. They are very attuned to the global geopolitical situations. And the fact that Singaporean Prime Minister went to the trouble of going to Beijing, then to Pyongyang, and then Seoul, I think it means that they are sensing that diplomacy is probably getting another opportunity, another chance. Even though we know that North Korea is very lukewarm towards Seoul, he's very insisting on the so-called 2 hostile states doctrine, and they announced that it's been incorporated into their constitution. What's interesting, though, is that the outsiders, they're essentially focusing on North Korea. And I think the reasons are several, and clearly it's driven by President Trump's own interest in opening dialogue with Pyongyang or restarting dialogue with Kim Jong-un, but also because the administration in Seoul has also changed from the previous administration position of a hard line towards North Korea to one of engagement. So I think a country like Singapore, which are very aware of this kind of diplomatic opportunities, which allows them also to raise their profile in the international arena, sensing that all the stars are aligned for a possible diplomatic breakthrough. And that's something that probably North Korea is also watching. So I think if we go beyond the images of missile tests and very hostile, aggressive rhetoric from North Korea, something is afoot clearly underneath the surface. And I think this is a good message. I think a signal for the South Korean government, and also something that we should be watching out for.
That is good to hear for now. And now, shifting gears, Dr. Barry, I'd like to turn to your reports say Russian naval vessels escorted ships suspected of transporting North Korean weapons, raising concerns that military cooperation between North Korea and Russia is becoming increasingly evident and overt. To what extent has the UN sanctions regime on North Korea effectively eroded at this point?
Oh, I think they're very much eroded. Although individual nations like New Zealand, are still sending planes, and other nations that have been doing it for several years, sending ships and so forth. But it's essentially eroded. And my big guess is that Russian vessels are likely carrying very sensitive military cargo to or from North Korea, and they're being escorted to ensure there's no interception. Because it's one thing to have planes spot what's going on, or satellites. It's another thing if ships come by and they, have some basis internationally based on the UN sanctions to board those ships. So to me, it's not surprising. And I think the thickness of the Russian support to North Korea on a military end, and the thickness of North Korean continuing support to Russia is extremely noteworthy. And we should also point out that there are rising murmurs of potential extension of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine extending into the Baltic states. It's a long, involved story, but we may see things spreading when they can't be solved and reduced down to the most simple problem, which we've not been able to do for the past 4 years.
I see. Well, Dr. Go, I'd like to turn to you about the recent NPT review conference, which failed to, include adopt a final consensus document, and also language on North Korea's nuclear program was omitted from the final draft. Is the North Korean issue kind of slipping away from the international community's effort?
But the NPT regime, it's not just about North Korean nuclear issue. It's more of an umbrella issue or framework to ensure there's less risk of a nuclear war breaking out globally.
Right.
So it's a global, very important part of the global security system promoted and then managed by the United Nations. And the NPT conference is taking place not every year, but then every 5, 6, 7 years. So, but then the trends in the last couple of conferences has been pretty negative already.
Right.
So this is not the first time that the major powers to be have been able to achieve consensus on their conference discussions. It has already happened in 2015 and 2022. We know what's going on. We know that the reason why these NPT conferences are not being able to come out with a consensus is because, first of all, there's a great power competition between the United States and China. China is building up their nuclear arsenal with an eye on the potential Taiwan conflict. And then also we know that Russia, we used to be more or less a well-behaving member of the United Nations Security Council. So there's a major nuclear power, obviously. It's misbehaving now because it's using nuclear threat when they're conducting war against Ukraine. So these are all very problematic issues. These are major fires that the global community is focusing on. Compared to that, North Korean nuclear issue is serious. We know it has a very potential for negative consequences. It's explosive in a way, potentially. But it's more like a simmering fire. It's been simmering for many, many years. So in that sense, we have to compare a simmering fire that's predictable to a major fire that's breaking out all the time with a potential for immediate catastrophic consequences. So I think this is the reason why the international community is focusing on other issues, and then these issues involve major powers such as Russia and China. That's why we are not able to achieve consensus. So in that sense, I wouldn't read too negatively about the failure of the lack of achieving consensus, or including North Korean language in the draft. Also, it's a very bad sign because it's overlapping. If we grade a non-NPT conference on a curve, this is clearly not a A, B, or even C, but not an F either. So yeah, that's how I put it.
Alrighty. Well, let's fast forward to June, which is already next week. Dr. Barry, South Korea and the United States are expected to hold their first working level talks on, follow-up measures related to nuclear-powered submarines and broader nuclear cooperation. What impact could this have on the NPT regime and wider non-proliferation order in Northeast Asia?
You know, in all honesty, I just see that nuclear-powered subs are a big carrot that Trump dangled last year in order to gain South Korean cooperation on both strategic matters in East Asia and investment, particularly the investment in the U.S. Trump probably doesn't remember what the NPT is. When he first heard it, he probably said, "What corporation is that, and how valuable is their stock?" I mean, he doesn't remember things like that. People under him are carrying out these activities, which he nodded his head in approval. But it seems to me that, in any case, nuclear-powered subs, from my understanding, take advantage of a loophole in the NPT treaty. But I don't perceive President Trump having any stake whatsoever in the continuance of the NPT treaty as he minimally understands it, because he may feel it's in the best interest of the United States for certain countries, such as those in East Asia that are American allies, to become more or less nuclear powered in various military capabilities. So I would just leave it at that. I think that's the level of depth that President Trump has on the issue.
All right, let's how the talks go next month. We'll have to leave it here for tonight. Dr. Barry, thank you so much for joining us all the way from New York tonight, and morning for you.
Very welcome.
And also, Dr. Go, thank you for your time and your insight as always.
My pleasure.
We also thank you for staying with us tonight. This has been Kim Dami. Good night.